So let's talk about Haiti. It's a story you might think you know, but it goes so much deeper. We're talking about the world's first black republic, a nation literally forged in the fire of the only successful slave revolt in all of human history. I mean, think about that for a second. It's a story of an impossible victory, but also of crushing burdens and a revolution that in many ways is still fighting to be finished. Let's get into it.
You really can't understand Haiti without first getting a handle on this. This quote, it's not an exaggeration. It's a window into the sheer, unimaginable brutality of what was then the French colony of Saint-Domingue. This kind of horror wasn't just common, it was the system. It was the engine that powered the colony's massive wealth, and it created a level of desperation that was bound to explode. And when it did, it changed the world.
All right, so let's set the stage for that explosion. We're going back to the late 1700s. The colony of Saint-Domingue was known as the Pearl of the Antilles, and for good reason. It was hands down the most profitable colony on the entire planet.
I mean, just look at these numbers. It's kind of staggering, right? This one tiny island was churning out 40% of all the sugar and 60% of all the coffee that Europe was consuming. But all of this incredible wealth, every single bit of it, was built on the backs of 500,000 enslaved Africans, and they were ruled by just 32,000 whites. The conditions were so horrific that people were literally worked to death faster than they could be born. The only way the system kept going was by constantly shipping in more people from Africa to replace the dead.
So in 1791, it all just breaks. It starts with a voodoo ceremony, and from there, a massive, coordinated revolt just erupts across the colony. What followed was this incredibly bloody 13-year war. The rebels didn't just fight, they outsmarted and outmaneuvered the Spanish and the British who tried to intervene. And even when France officially abolished slavery, the fight wasn't over. Napoleon, the most powerful man in Europe, sent a huge army to bring back slavery in the old system. But his army was defeated by the rebels and by yellow fever. And in 1804, they did the impossible. They declared independence.
But right from the start, you see this massive split in how to move forward. On one side, you have Toussaint Louverture, a tactical genius who thought, maybe, just maybe, they could create a new society where everyone could coexist. On the other side was his lieutenant, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and he was like, no way, not after what they did to us. He believed the only path forward was total, complete separation. When Louverture was tricked, captured, and died in a French prison, it was Dessalines' uncompromising vision that won out and defined the new nation of Haiti.
So they won. They actually did it. A monumental achievement. But winning the war was one thing. Paying for that freedom was something else entirely. And that price? Well, it was almost insurmountable.
Okay, so get this. In 1825, France sails back in. Not with an army to reconquer Haiti, but with a fleet of warships and a bill. They demanded 150 million francs. In exchange, they'd recognize Haiti as a real country. But this wasn't a normal debt. They called it an indemnity. It was a payment to the former slave owners for their lost property, which of course included the very people who had just freed themselves. It's just unbelievable. Haiti was forced to pay reparations to its former enslavers. To get the money, they had to take out massive loans from French banks at terrible interest rates. And how long did it take to pay this off? Take a look. All the way until 1947. Think about what that means. For 122 years, while other nations are building schools, roads, and hospitals, Haiti is sending a huge chunk of its income to France. It basically froze the country's development for over a century.
So you've got this crushing debt from the outside, and then on the inside, the country literally splits in two. In the north, you get a kingdom that keeps the big plantations going with forced labor to make money. It worked, financially, but it was brutal. In the south, you get a republic that breaks up the land into small farms for everyone. It was a nicer idea, but the government was constantly broke. It's like two completely different experiments in nation building happening at the exact same time.
Now, the country did eventually unify, but those early problems, that crippling debt, the deep political divisions, they didn't just go away. In fact, they set the stage for the next 100 years of turmoil.
The 19th and early 20th centuries were basically just a revolving door of presidents, coups, and chaos. I mean, just look at the period between 1911 and 1915. That's 4 years. In that time, Haiti went through 7 different presidents. 7. It was pure chaos, and all this instability, plus growing American and German business interests, is what eventually led the U.S. to just send in the Marines in 1915.
So the U.S. occupied Haiti for 19 years. And on the one hand, yeah, they built some roads and infrastructure, but the cost to Haitians was huge. The Americans rewrote the Constitution, getting rid of a 100-year-old law that had banned foreigners from owning land. They brought back a hated system of forced labor to get those roads built. And they created a new, centralized military, which, as you can probably guess, would go on to cause a lot of problems for decades to come.
So the U.S. leaves in 1934, but things don't really get better. You get a couple more decades of instability, and that kind of constant chaos creates a power vacuum. And in 1957, that vacuum was filled by a man who would become one of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century, François Duvalier.
Duvalier, known as Papa Doc, held onto power with pure terror. His main tool was his personal paramilitary force, the Tonton Macoutes. Think of them as a secret police, loyal only to him, and known for their absolute brutality. But Papa Doc was clever. He mixed that physical violence with psychological fear. He used Vodou imagery to build a cult of personality, making people believe he was this powerful priest who was always watching.
And the result? It was a regime of absolute terror. It's estimated that during his rule, Papa Doc and his Tonton Macoutes killed at least 30,000 Haitians. Anyone who even thought about opposing him was silenced.
When Papa Doc died, his 19-year-old son, Baby Doc, took over. But he was different. If the father was all about terror and power, the son was all about the money. He was basically a playboy who treated the entire country like his personal piggy bank, stealing hundreds of millions while the economy just collapsed. It all came to a head when he threw himself a multi-million-dollar wedding. For a country that was starving, that was the last straw. A huge popular uprising finally forced him out in 1986.
So the Duvalier dictatorship is finally over. This should have been it, right? A brand new dawn for Haiti. But, as we're about to see, the path to a stable democracy has been anything but smooth. It's been one crisis after another.
I mean, this timeline of the last few decades is just relentless. You get this moment of incredible hope with the first democratic election, and boom, a military coup. He gets back into power, boom, another coup. Then, just when you think things can't possibly get any worse, nature itself deals a devastating blow. And in just the last few years, a president was assassinated and the government has all but collapsed in the face of widespread gang violence.
The 2010 earthquake. Words like apocalyptic just don't do it justice. We're talking up to 300,000 people dead, over 1 million homeless. But it wasn't just a humanitarian disaster. It was like the country's central nervous system was wiped out. The National Palace, government buildings, just rubble. And then, to make a horrific situation even worse, the international response accidentally sparked a deadly cholera epidemic. It was just a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe.
And that brings us pretty much to today. The power vacuum left by all this political turmoil and the president's assassination has been filled by heavily armed gangs. They now control huge parts of the capital, Port-au-Prince. They're effectively challenging the very existence of the state and creating an absolutely massive humanitarian crisis.
When you step back and look at it all, Haiti's story is this incredible, profound testament to resilience. It's a nation born from the most radical fight for freedom you can imagine, but it's also a nation that has been systematically burdened from its very first day by outside forces and by its own internal divisions. It just seems to be one blow after another, and it leaves you with this one huge question. After more than 200 years, what will it finally take for Haiti to achieve the stability and peace that was promised by its revolution?
We hope this explainer gave you a clearer picture of Haiti's long and challenging history. If you'd like to explore more stories like this, we've got a whole playlist called Quick Country Histories that you should definitely check out. And of course, make sure to subscribe to Notebook Summaries for more. Thanks so much for watching.